You've dropped weight, cleaned up your diet, and maybe your pants and shirts are fitting looser, but that stubborn belly fat's hanging on for dear life. And most guys don't realize that belly fat doesn't just sit there doing nothing. It actively fights your testosterone, your insulin, your posture, and metabolic health. So if you don't know why your belly fat isn't shrinking, you won't be able to lose it. So let me break down 10 reasons of why the belly fat's still there so you can get rid of it. Here's the truth that most guys don't want to hear. That lower stomach pouch, especially the visceral fat, is the last to go. So if your belly fat's still hanging on, it's simply because you are not lean enough yet. So even if your shirts are fitting better and you've lost weight, you might only be about halfway or thereabouts. And so this trap is most guys think they've done enough and they relax way too early. So the fact is, if you want to see visible abs with sharper muscle definition all around and that leaner V-taper shape, you have to push past the point that you're stuck at. Even if that means losing more weight than what you anticipated, and even if that means people are commenting and saying your face looks too lean or you look too skinny, so what? Just ignore them. Because getting from 20% to 15% body fat is what's going to change everything for you. But it gets even harder if this next issue is quietly working against you. Most guys think fat just sits there, but visceral fat isn't passive. It's metabolically active tissue and it works against you. It releases a hormone called aromatase, which basically converts testosterone into estrogen. It also raises your inflammation and your blood pressure and just all around makes it easier to store more body fat while making it harder to lose it. This is the kind of fat that makes your belly bulge out even if your legs, your arms, your face and neck and shoulders are actually looking a bit leaner. And so to fix this, you must keep losing fat while focusing on building muscle. Even if it's happening slowly, it doesn't matter as long as you're progressing towards that outcome. I know this sounds very simple and maybe you've heard it all before, but the fact is you can't outdo the simple things. And however, it's the simple things that keep men stuck, potentially yourself. And I see a lot of guys looking for all this complicated stuff that isn't going to move the needle because they're ignoring the simple stuff that is required for them to get results. And one thing that can really help with this is zone 2 cardio, because it's going to help you maintain a consistent daily burn rate without pushing too hard that you're going to use up all your glycogen and then be forced to feel hungry and eat more food. So there is this argument that if you do zone 2, which is a less intense cardio or exercise, that you're going to be burning more fat during that time that you're doing the exercise. Now that might be true. You might not be burning as much glycogen if you're doing a more zone 2 or steadier state cardio. But later on, you're going to burn off that glycogen doing something else. So the body's going to even itself out. So my point is, don't be pushing into extreme cardio trying to burn off things faster. You want to maintain that steady state. And that is where a lot of guys are lacking, is they're pushing really hard and then backing off. But you would have been better off just keeping it nice and steady day after day after day. And then week after week, month after month, you'll start to see these changes compounding, provided you're actually keeping a good record of what you're doing. So you can look back and say, well, here's where I was. Here's what happened. Now here's the progress I can see. So don't go all out crazy and then slack off, because that'll keep you stuck forever. But visceral fat isn't the only thing in the way. There are other hormones that can play a role, keeping you stuck above 20% body fat, even if it feels like you're doing everything perfectly. So once you've dropped some fat, it can feel like your body is like fighting you. And in a way, it kind of is. So when you're in a calorie deficit, as a result, your leptin is going to drop. That is the hormone that signals satiety to the brain to say, hey, we have enough food, we're good. The problem is with less leptin, that leads to more ghrelin. That is the hunger hormone. I like to think of it as the little gremlin in our stomach that's trying to get food. And this is the hormone that's going to make your cravings harder to resist. However, even after losing weight, a lot of guys still deal with insulin resistance, especially around the belly. So what that means is that your body doesn't handle carbs as efficiently, so it makes it easier to regain fat if you're not careful. So it's a risky phase where these rebounds are common after you've lost a bit of weight, but the body hasn't fully adapted to your new shape, or there just maybe isn't enough muscle there, or you're not quite at the goal that you need to be. And then if you stack stress on top of this and poor sleep, then your cortisol is going to spike, testosterone will drop, and ultimately that's going to have an impact on your metabolism, declining it even further. All this combined just makes it harder to keep losing fat around the waist. But this is not about blaming hormones. It's about knowing what the problem is so that you can fix that specific problem. And if you don't, this next thing will sneak up on you and suddenly block your progress. So eventually fat loss is going to slow down and hit a plateau, because even after losing a chunk of weight, your basal metabolic rate, your BMR, also known as your baseline metabolism, is going to drop a little bit. What that means is that you're going to burn slightly fewer calories at rest. And often as we lose more body fat and we're in this calorie deficit for a longer time, the body notices there's less energy coming in and it will spontaneously reduce your incidental movement. Maybe you're someone like me with this Italian hand talking thing, but
waving my hands a lot.
Then if you're in a deficit for a long time, there might be no hand movement at all, and then here's calories that you're not burning. I know it sounds silly, but if you look at my Oura Ring data, I actually burn a good chunk of calories doing these videos because I'm moving my hands so much versus just sitting at the computer and not moving at all. So the body is smarter than you think, and what works in the beginning isn't guaranteed to work to get you to the end. And this is why you need to adjust your diet or your output and just what's happening along the journey to account for this slight decrease in your BMR. I typically find somewhere between that 10 to 20 pound drop, there's going to be a shift in BMR, and then another 10 to 20 pounds might be another shift. However, the deficit to account for this doesn't have to be drastic. And if you're patient, I would recommend starting with a adjustment of 100 calories at a time until you've proven exactly what the new deficit zone is. And so fat loss slowing down as you get leaner isn't just in your head, it is a real thing. So just accept it and be okay with it. And most guys don't realize this, yet they fall into this next pattern which quickly kills their results. So you may have your weekdays dialed in with clean meals, workouts, steps, it's all going well, but then Friday night hits. Your calories creep up, drinks arrive, or there's takeaway food, bigger portions, snacks. And by Sunday night, the weekend has wiped out your entire weekly deficit. And so now you're just spinning your wheels, or even in a surplus, which should have been in a deficit for the entire week. So it might not be that your plan doesn't work, but that your weekends are undoing the perfect plan that you have. And there's a thing that can happen behind the scenes that makes this even worse again. Because most guys who lose weight fast are also losing muscle, or at least they're not building any more muscle than what they have. And so less muscle equals a lower BMR. It also means less muscle definition, narrower shoulders, skinnier arms, flat chest, no lats, and a higher chance of holding onto that visceral belly fat that I was talking about earlier. And this is why some guys can just shrink, but they don't look stronger or even necessarily leaner because there's no muscle underneath that thinner layer of fat to create that athletic looking body shape. So the benefit of building more muscle, and I know this sounds very simple, everyone's heard to build more muscle, but I'm showing you why it's important so that you can understand the impact and the relevancy of the things I'm talking about. Because there's no point in me talking about all these complicated scientific research studies if you can't even implement the simple stuff every week. So my point is, having more muscle is what's going to help buffer that BMR decline. It's not going to guarantee it's going to increase unless you were to put on like 20 pounds of muscle, and to even achieve that in such a short amount of time, you'd have to be on steroids or be training all out properly for at least a year or a year and a half. However, building more muscle will buffer that decline that's going to naturally happen when you're losing fat. And with more muscle, it does make it generally easier to burn off that visceral fat. A good example is sumo wrestlers. So they weigh like 300 plus pounds. They're eating 6,000 to 10,000 calories per day. But because they're training for 4 to 5 and 6 hours a day in their sumo training camps or whatever they're called, their ratio of body fat to visceral fat isn't actually too bad. But the problems begin once these sumo wrestlers retire. If they keep up that same diet without the training, they get like rapid metabolic issues happening fast because the muscle's shrinking, but the energy's still coming in. So all that fat is storing more as visceral fat and having a negative impact on their metabolic health. So the point is, even guys who do train really hard can get stuck, especially if they're missing this next crucial factor. So often when guys drop 20 to 30 pounds, they think they're all sweet, but they're not. Because then the calorie creep kicks in. An extra bite here, an extra sip of that, finishing the kids' leftovers. Just eyeballing portions, thinking they know what it is when it's really probably 100 or 200 more calories than what they think. Or just completely skipping days or weeks of tracking, thinking that they're okay now because they've lost 10 or 20 pounds. And suddenly, the days that they were in a deficit losing body fat are now just maintenance days. Because they're not tracking their weight consistently. They're not tracking their calories and their protein consistently. They're not tracking their calorie burn or their steps. And the truth is, you cannot manage what you do not measure. The fat loss is really mathematical when you bring it down to the data. And the fact is, the leaner you get, the more these margins matter. And so if your progress is stalled, stop trying to guess. Track tighter and expose the truth of what's really going on. Because if you don't, you'll get stuck in this next trap, which is a complete waste of your time. I've seen a lot of guys go super hard, lose some weight, and then think, surely I should look leaner by now. And they feel a bit disheartened because they're comparing themselves to somebody else instead of their own data and progress. And the truth is, 15% body fat looks different on every guy because everyone is going to be at a different height, different leg and arm lengths, torso to leg ratio, the way that fat distributes. It all plays a role. And so shorter guys can look softer, whereas taller guys can look even leaner at the same percentage of body fat because their fat is more spread out across their limbs. So when it comes to your progress, don't go off feelings, moods, or what you think should be happening. Go off your data. This means your weight trends, the weekly trends more specifically, and even zoom out more, look at the monthly trends. Look at the progression in your photos, not just the belly, but look at the shape and your muscle size, where definition is showing up. Typically, you'll see the back gets leaner first, then it works its way around to the shoulders, arms, and chest, then down the sides and eventually across the belly, and that lower belly around the belly button is the last spot to go. Because until you start to see the outline of your abs, you're not as lean as you think. And staying stuck in this comparison mode is only going to make the next thing worse. It's a common mistake for men to try and burn it off with more cardio when the scale starts to stall. Like doing long hikes or weekend runs and then feeling starved and overeating as a result of burning out. Another effect is then drinking heaps of water, which causes the scale to spike because the body's a bit inflamed and sore from doing so much cardio. And then going from that all-out massive effort to days where they barely move at all, yet they're still eating the same calorie budget for those days too. And so cardio helps, but it's not the main lever that you can pull for sustained fat loss long term unless you're always doing the same amount of cardio. Because the fact is, you can burn 300 calories in 1 hour, but you can wipe that out in 5 minutes with 3 or 4 bites of a dessert. So don't rush to do more cardio until your deficit and your diet is fine-tuned and dialed in. And once they are, then you can test different changes and use the data to track the impact that it's having on your body, your weight, your definition, and of course your energy that you have throughout the day and the ability for you to push in your workouts and hit those PBs that's going to lead to more muscle growth over time. And so even with the perfect diet and the perfect workouts, it's this last point that also keeps men stuck with this visceral fat belly. It's a bit like driving with the handbrake on and wondering why you're not getting anywhere. You're eating right, you're training hard, but your body has subtly locked the brakes by cutting back your natural movement. This is not about cardio. I'm talking about your NEAT. This is the walking, the fidgeting, standing up, sitting down, moving your hands, cleaning, carrying the grocery bags, picking up the kids, feeding the dog, having a shower. All of this can slightly drop without you noticing. And so even with the perfect diet, if your NEAT is too low, you're not going to be in a deficit, or at least a very small one that's shrunk because the NEAT is declining. It's like one day you burn 2,500 calories, but the next day you burn 2,100 calories. That is a big drop by 300 calories from day to day. And the problem is, after losing a bunch of weight, the body is naturally going to try to reduce this incidental movement, basically to save energy. And so unless you're hitting that 8K to 10K steps per day, every day, your diet is gonna have to work harder by you simply eating less. So before you cut out more food or try to add in extra workouts, check your NEAT first. Look at the trends and see what days you're leaking out energy burn that you could have had, all the days that you're getting more energy burn. What's the difference? What is getting in the way? And try to even that out and raise it first before you start cutting out more food. Because this could simply be the one thing holding you back. I've seen this fix so many fat loss issues. It's not funny, simply because people are eating so well, but they're just not burning enough. So they're not even in a deficit. And once they start burning more, without doing like an hour of cardio or treadmill, just by simply moving more throughout the day, it jacks up their total daily energy expenditure, otherwise their total daily metabolism, and they're now suddenly in a minor deficit, losing fat over time. But if you're unsure of like how to fix this or where to start exactly or what the step-by-step process is, this is exactly what I break down in the Business Body Blueprint routine. It's built for busy men with at least 20 plus pounds to lose, doing only 3 workouts a week. To get the details on this, tap the link below the video. It's right there in the description. And then go watch this video here to avoid my biggest fat loss mistakes that kept me stuck at 20% body fat. Watch this next.